The cathedral was silent. 200 guests held their breath. David Chibwe stood frozen at the altar, his hands still clasped in joys, but his eyes were locked on the old man who had just shuffled down the aisle in rags. Security moved forward, but David's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Let him pass." Joy's grip tightened on his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric of his tuxedo. "David, don't do this. Not here. Not now." But David didn't look at her. He stepped down from the altar as the old man reached him, limping on a bad leg, his weathered face lined with years of sun and suffering. The old man leaned close, his voice a whisper that only David could hear. "Your father paid for my sister." David's knees nearly buckled. His hands began to shake. The color drained from his face as if someone had opened a valve and let his life pour out onto the marble floor. "What did you just say?" The old man's eyes filled with tears. "Esther Tambwe, 30 years ago, a stranger gave her $100. That stranger saved your life before you ever took your first breath." The wedding stopped breathing. The cameras stopped flashing, and in that moment, David Chibwe realized that everything he thought he knew about his life had been built on a foundation of silence. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, we must go back. Back to a Monday morning, back to a concrete block at a bus terminal, back to the first time a billionaire looked into the eyes of a man the world had forgotten and saw something he couldn't ignore. Before we begin this journey, tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is in your country right now. If stories about hidden truths, the cost of kindness, and the power of remembering move your heart, subscribe to Kings and Billionaire Romance Stories by Dennis, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see everything. 1 year earlier, David Chibwe woke at 5:30 in the morning, just as he did every day. His penthouse apartments stretched out in glass and steel, overlooking the waking city of Lusaka. The skyline shimmered in the early light, a kingdom he had built from nothing. David was a white man who had made his fortune in Africa. Construction, real estate, mining. He had arrived 15 years ago with a degree, a dream, and a refusal to quit. Now his name opened doors. His signature closed deals. His wealth bought him access to rooms where decisions were made that shaped the future of nations. But every Monday morning, David did something no one understood. He drove himself to work. No chauffeur, no security detail. Just him, alone, windows down, letting the city wake up around him. His route took him down Cairo Road, past the old bus terminal where the city's forgotten gathered. Vendors selling roasted maize, women balancing baskets on their heads, men waiting for work that might never come. It was there, at exactly 7:10 in the morning, that David first saw him. The old man sat on a cracked concrete block near the bus stop. His back was slightly bent, his clothes faded but clean. On his knees rested a small wooden tray, 2 packs of biscuits, a worn leather Bible, nothing else. He didn't shout. He didn't wave. He didn't chase after passing cars like so many others did. He simply sat, waiting, as if he had all the time in the world. David's phone had been ringing. He pulled over near the curb, searching for a better signal, and that's when he heard it. "Sir, please." The voice was soft, respectful. It didn't demand. It invited. David turned. The old man had risen slowly, carefully, favoring his right leg. His eyes met David's through the open window. They were dark, deep, and impossibly steady. "I don't need much," the old man said. "Just $100. David frowned. People asked him for money all the time. Business associates seeking loans. Strangers who somehow knew his name, demanding donations, investments, partnerships. They asked for thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes more. But this man stood in rags and asked for $100. "That's all you need?" David asked. The old man nodded. "That's all I need today." Something about the way he said today unsettled David, as if the word carried weight, as if there would be other days, other needs, other moments just like this one. David reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp bill, and handed it through the window. The old man took it with both hands, his fingers rough and scarred. "Thank you, sir. May the soil remember your footsteps." David didn't know what that meant, but the words stayed with him as he drove away. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the old man still standing there, watching him go, the bill folded carefully in his palm. It was nothing, David told himself. $100. Pocket change. A moment of charity on a Monday morning. But the next Monday, The old man was there again. Same spot, same tray, same quiet posture. When David's car slowed, the old man stood, careful with his bad leg, and approached the window. "Good morning, sir." David stared at him. "I gave you money last week." "Yes, sir, and I was grateful." "Then why are you asking again?" The old man tilted his head slightly, as if the question confused him. "Because last week is finished." David didn't know what to say to that. He handed over another $100 and drove away, disturbed in a way he couldn't name. The third Monday, David told himself he wouldn't stop. He had meetings, contracts to review, a schedule that didn't leave room for distractions. But as he approached the bus terminal, he saw the old man sitting on the concrete block, and his foot pressed the brake before his mind could argue. The old man stood. David handed him the money. No words exchanged this time, just a nod, a quiet thank you, and David drove on, wondering why he felt like he was the one receiving something. By the fourth week, it had become a ritual. By the eighth week, David realized he was arriving earlier just to make sure he didn't miss him. By the 12th week, he began to notice things. The old man never spent the money at the terminal. David started watching from across the street, parked in the shadow of an abandoned shop. The old man would wait until David's car disappeared. Then he would rise slowly and make his way down the street. David followed once, not closely, not like a predator, just far enough to see where the old man went. He walked for nearly 20 minutes, his limp more pronounced with each step, until he reached a public hospital on the edge of the city. The kind of place where the poor waited in lines that stretched around the building, where nurses worked double shifts and still couldn't save everyone, where hope came with a price tag. David watched as the old man entered through the side door marked maternity ward. He saw him approach a young nurse at the desk, saw him hand over the folded bills, saw the nurse nod, her face softening with something that looked like relief. Then the old man turned and walked back out, his hands empty, his tray still balanced under his arm. David sat in his car for a long time after that, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. The man was giving it away. Every week, David gave him $100, and every week, the man walked to a hospital and handed it to a nurse. That night, David couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about his mother, Esther Chibwe. He hadn't thought about her, really thought about her in years. She had died when he was 5. The memories were fragments. Her voice singing him to sleep. Her hands, rough from work, braiding his hair. The smell of soap and maize meal, and something sweet he could never name. His father had raised him after that. A cold, distant man who never spoke of Esther, who packed away her photos, her clothes, her entire existence, and told David to move forward. When his father died, David had been 16. Alone, angry, determined to prove that he didn't need anyone. And he had. He built an empire. He became someone. He erased the poverty of his childhood and replaced it with power. But lying there in the dark, David realized something. He had never asked how his mother died. He had never asked where. He had never asked if she had been alone. The next morning, David arrived at the bus terminal earlier than usual. The old man was already there, sitting on his concrete block, his Bible open in his lap. David parked the car and stepped out. People nearby froze. A few recognized him. Phones appeared. Whispers spread like fire. But David ignored them. He walked across the cracked pavement and sat down beside the old man. The concrete was hard, hot, unforgiving. David didn't care. The old man looked at him, surprise flickering in his eyes, but he didn't speak. They sat in silence for a moment, the city roaring around them. Buses pulling in and out, vendors shouting prices, children laughing and crying in equal measure. Finally, David spoke. "Why do you give it away?" The old man closed his Bible slowly. "Give what? The money. I've seen you. You take it straight to the hospital." The old man smiled faintly. "You followed me. I was curious." The old man nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "I give it away because someone once gave to me." David waited. 30 years ago, the old man continued, his voice quiet but steady. "My sister was dying. She was pregnant. Alone. She collapsed outside a hospital, and they wouldn't let her in. No money, no care. That's how it works for people like us." David's throat tightened. "I was young then, helpless. I begged anyone who would listen. And then a stranger stopped. A white man, older, with kind eyes. He asked what we needed. The nurse said, $100 for the emergency deposit. The old man paused, his gaze distant. He gave it without hesitation, didn't ask her name, didn't ask mine, just handed the money to the nurse and walked away. David felt something shift in his chest. What happened to your sister? The old man's eyes glistened. The baby was born. Healthy, strong, a boy. And your sister? The old man's voice dropped to a whisper. She lived 3 days, long enough to name him, long enough to hold him, long enough to make me promise I would find him one day and tell him the truth. David's heart was pounding now, loud and insistent, like a drum in his ears. What truth? That his life was bought with kindness, that a stranger's $100 gave him breath. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible. David swallowed hard. What was the boy's name? The old man looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. The edges were worn, the image yellowed with age. He handed it to David. David's hands trembled as he took it. The photograph showed a young woman, beautiful, exhausted, her skin dark and smooth, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed ancient. In her arms was a baby, wrapped in a thin blanket, his eyes closed, his tiny fist curled against her chest. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 words, Esther and David. David couldn't breathe. The world tilted. The noise of the terminal faded to a distant hum. His vision blurred. This is my mother. The old man nodded slowly. Yes. David's voice cracked. And you've known this whole time? I recognized you 3 years ago. I saw your picture in the newspaper. You looked just like her. 3 years, David whispered. You've been waiting 3 years? The old man's eyes were full of something David couldn't name. Patience, sorrow, love. I've been waiting 30 years, the old man said. 3 more didn't seem like much. David stood abruptly, the photograph clutched in his hand. He turned away, his chest heaving, his mind racing. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, his voice rising. Why didn't you say something the first time I gave you money? The old man remained seated, calm as still water. Because you weren't ready to hear it. How do you know what I was ready for? The old man smiled sadly. Because if I had told you who I was, you would have helped me out of guilt, not out of kindness. And I didn't want your guilt. I wanted your heart. David felt tears burning in his eyes. Who are you? The old man rose slowly, leaning on his stick. My name is Elias Tambwe. Esther was my sister. And you, David Chibwe, are the reason I have spent 30 years giving away every $100 I can find. David's knees buckled. He sat down hard on the concrete, the photograph still gripped in his shaking hands. Elias sat beside him again, his movements slow and deliberate. Your mother loved you, Elias said softly. She didn't have much time, but every second she had, she spent loving you. And before she died, she made me promise something. What? David whispered. She made me promise that if you ever became a man of means, I would make sure you never forgot where you came from, that you would never forget the cost of $100. David closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. And the stranger who paid for her? Who was he? Elias shook his head. I never found out. He left before I could ask. But I've spent my whole life trying to be like him. David looked at him. This man in rags who had carried a secret for 30 years, who had waited in silence, who had given away every dollar David ever handed him. You've been honoring a debt that wasn't even yours, David said. Elias smiled. The best debts are the ones we choose. They sat together in the noise and chaos of the terminal. 2 men bound by blood and kindness and $100 that had echoed across 3 decades. Finally, David spoke, his voice hoarse. I need to know everything. Every detail. Every moment. Elias nodded. Then sit with me, and I will tell you the story of the day you were born. David sat, and Elias began. Your mother was 19 years old when she got pregnant. The father was a man who promised her the world and gave her nothing. When he found out about the baby, he disappeared. Esther's family disowned her. She had no money, no place to go. She worked where she could, cleaning floors, washing clothes, carrying water. David listened, his heart breaking with every word. She was strong, Elias continued, stronger than anyone I've ever known. But strength doesn't stop hunger. It doesn't stop pain. When the labor started, she was alone. I found her on the street, barely conscious. I carried her to the hospital on my back. Elias's voice grew thick with emotion. They took one look at her and asked for money. I had nothing. I begged. I shouted. I wept. And they turned us away. David's fists clenched. We sat outside for hours. Esther was fading. I thought I was going to lose her right there on the steps. And then he came. Who? The stranger. He was walking past. He saw us. He stopped. He didn't ask questions. He just asked what we needed. And when the nurse told him, he paid. Elias looked at David, his eyes shining. They took Esther in. You were born an hour later. Healthy, perfect, loud. David laughed through his tears. Esther held you. She looked at you like you were the only thing in the world that mattered. And she named you David. She said it meant beloved. And you were. What happened to her? Elias's face darkened. Her body couldn't recover. The labor had been too long, too hard. She developed an infection. The hospital did what they could, but it wasn't enough. She died 3 days later. David's chest ached. Did she say anything at the end? Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, brittle with age. She wrote you a letter. She asked me to give it to you when the time was right. David took the paper with trembling hands. He unfolded it carefully, afraid it might crumble. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but the words were clear. To my son, David, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I wish I could have stayed. I wish I could have seen the man you will become. But I am grateful for the time I had. 3 days with you was worth a lifetime. A stranger saved your life. I don't know his name. I don't know where he came from. But I know that kindness is the only thing that lasts. Money fades. Power crumbles. But kindness echoes forever. I pray that you will be kind, that you will see people the way that stranger saw me. Not as a burden, not as a problem, but as a life worth saving. I love you, my son. I loved you before you were born. I loved you in every breath I took. And I will love you long after I am gone. Your mother, Esther Tambwe. David couldn't see through the tears. He held the letter to his chest and wept, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place he didn't know existed. Elias placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. She would be so proud of you. David shook his head. I've wasted so much. I've built so much and forgotten so much. Elias's grip tightened. Then stop wasting. Start remembering. They sat together until the sun climbed higher and the terminal grew crowded. And when David finally stood, he felt different, lighter, heavier, broken and whole at the same time. He looked at Elias. I don't know what to do with this. Elias smiled. You'll figure it out. You're her son. David nodded slowly. Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out every bill he had. Elias raised a hand. No. Just 100, like always. David shook his head. This isn't charity. This is family. Elias looked at him for a long moment. Then he took the money, his eyes wet. Thank you, my son. David turned to leave, then stopped. Will you be here next Monday? Elias smiled. I've been here every Monday for 30 years. I'm not stopping now. David nodded. Then he walked back to his car, climbed in, and sat in silence, his mother's letter still clutched in his hand. He didn't go to the office that day. He drove to his penthouse, walked past the glass and steel, and sat on the floor of his bedroom, staring at the photograph of Esther holding him. For the first time in his life, David Chibwe understood who he was, and it terrified him, because the life he had built, the woman he was about to marry, the empire he commanded, all of it suddenly felt like a performance. And the only person who had ever seen the real him was a man in rags sitting on a concrete block, giving away $100 every week. That evening, Joy came home. She found David sitting in the dark, the photograph on the floor beside him. David, what's wrong? He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the picture. Joy sat beside him, her voice soft. Talk to me. David handed her the photograph. This is my mother. Joy studied it, her brow furrowing. I didn't know you had pictures of her. I didn't either. Until today. Joy looked at him, confused. Where did you get this? David's voice was flat. From the man I've been giving money to every Monday. Joy's expression shifted. Confusion gave way to something sharper. Suspicion. The homeless man? His name is Elias, and he's my uncle." Joy laughed, a short, nervous sound. "David, that's impossible." David turned to her, his eyes hard. "He's my mother's brother. He was there the day I was born. He's been waiting 30 years to tell me the truth." Joy set the photograph down carefully. "What truth?" "That my mother died because she was poor. That a stranger paid $100 to save my life. That everything I am, everything I have, started with an act of kindness I never knew about." Joy stood, smoothing her dress. "David, this is a lot to process. Maybe you should take some time before you—" "Before I what?" David interrupted. "Before I believe him." Joy's jaw tightened. "Before you let some stranger manipulate you." David stood, his voice rising. "He's not a stranger. He's family." Joy crossed her arms. "He's a homeless man who saw an opportunity and took it." David's hands clenched into fists. "You don't know him." "And you do?" Joy shot back. "You've known him for what, a few months? And suddenly he's your uncle? Suddenly he has all the answers about your past." David took a step toward her. "He has a photograph, a letter. He knows things no one else could know." Joy's eyes flashed. "Or he did his research. People know who you are, David. They know your story. It's not hard to piece together a convincing lie." David stared at her, his chest heaving. "Why are you so determined not to believe him?" Joy's voice dropped, cold and precise. "Because I know how the world works. And I know that people like him survive by taking advantage of people like you." David felt something crack inside him. "People like him? What does that mean?" Joy didn't flinch. Poor, desperate, willing to say anything for money. The silence that followed was suffocating. David's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Get out." Joy blinked. "What?" "Get out. Now." Joy's composure slipped. "David, I'm trying to protect you." "No," David said, his voice gaining strength. "You're trying to protect the version of me you want me to be, the one that fits your world, your image, your perfect life." Joy's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained sharp. "I have stood by you. I have built this life with you. And you're going to throw it away for some story from a man you barely know?" David looked at her, really looked at her, and realized he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. "The wedding is in 3 days, Joy said, her voice shaking. 3 days, David, and you're going to destroy everything because of him." David turned away. "Maybe there's nothing to destroy." Joy grabbed his arm, spinning him around. "If you humiliate me at that altar, if you choose him over me, I will make sure you regret it." David pulled his arm free. "I already regret it. I just didn't know until today." Joy stared at him, her face pale. Then she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. David stood alone in the silence, his heart pounding, his mother's letter still in his hand. He read it again. "Kindness is the only thing that lasts." And for the first time in his life, David Chibway knew what he had to do, even if it cost him everything. The 3 days before the wedding passed like a slow-motion collapse. David barely slept. He spent his nights staring at the photograph of his mother, reading her letter until the words burned themselves into his memory. During the day, he went through the motions. Meetings, phone calls, signatures on documents that meant nothing. But every evening, he returned to the bus terminal. Elias was always there, waiting on the concrete block, his Bible open, his eyes calm. They didn't talk much. Sometimes David would sit beside him for an hour without saying a word. Sometimes he would ask questions about Esther, what she liked to eat, what made her laugh, what her voice sounded like when she sang. Elias answered every question with the patience of a man who had been waiting his entire life for someone to ask. On the second night before the wedding, David arrived at the terminal just as the sun was setting. The sky burned orange and red, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Elias looked up from his Bible. "You're troubled." David sat down heavily. "I don't know if I can go through with it." "The wedding?" David nodded. Elias closed his Bible. "Why not?" David exhaled slowly. "Because every time I look at Joy, I see someone who doesn't understand. Who doesn't want to understand. She thinks you're using me. She thinks this is all some elaborate con." Elias smiled faintly. "And what do you think?" David looked at him. "I think you're the only person who's ever told me the truth." Elias's expression softened. "Then you already know what to do." David shook his head. "If I walk away from this wedding, I lose everything. My reputation, my standing." Half of my business relationships are built on connections to her family. Elias leaned forward slightly. And if you don't walk away, David's voice dropped to a whisper, I lose myself. They sat in silence as the sun disappeared and the city lights flickered on one by one. Finally, Elias spoke. 30 years ago, a stranger gave $100. He didn't know your mother's name. He didn't know what would happen to you. He just gave because it was right. And that single act of righteousness changed everything. David listened. You have a choice, David. You can build a life on what looks good, or you can build a life on what is good. Only one of those will let you sleep at night. David felt tears prick his eyes. I'm afraid. Elias placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. Fear means you're about to do something that matters. David nodded slowly. Then he stood, reached into his wallet, and handed Elias $200. For this week and next week, in case I don't make it back on Monday. Elias took the money, his eyes searching David's face. You'll make it back. Men like you always do. Once they remember who they are. David walked back to his car, his heart pounding, his decision made. But joy wasn't finished. The next morning, David woke to find his phone flooded with messages. Text after text, email after email. All from people he barely knew, all saying the same thing. Congratulations on the wedding. Can't wait to celebrate with you. You and Joy are perfect together. David scrolled through them, his stomach turning. Then he saw the notification. Joy had posted on social media a photo of them from 6 months ago, smiling at some charity gala, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist. The caption read, 48 hours until forever. Grateful for this man and the life we're building together. 12,000 likes. Hundreds of comments. David stared at the screen, feeling the walls close in. His phone rang. Samuel, his business partner and the closest thing he had to a friend. David answered. Have you lost your mind? Samuel's voice was sharp, clipped. Good morning to you too. Joy called me. She said you're having doubts. She said you're thinking about calling off the wedding because of some homeless guy. David closed his eyes. It's not that simple. Then make it simple, Samuel said. Because from where I'm sitting, you're about to destroy a relationship with one of the most connected families in this city over a stranger. He's not a stranger, David said quietly. He's my uncle. Samuel paused. What? David told him everything. Esther, the hospital, the $100, the letter. When he finished, Samuel was silent for a long moment. Okay, Samuel said finally. Let's say it's all true. Let's say this guy really is your uncle. What does that change? Everything, David said. Samuel sighed. Look, I get it. It's emotional. It's heavy, but you can help him without blowing up your life. Set him up with a place to live. Give him a job. Hell, give him $100,000. But don't cancel this wedding. David's jaw tightened. This isn't about money. Then what is it about? It's about who I am when no one's watching. It's about whether I'm going to build my life on the truth or on a performance. Samuel's voice softened. David, I've known you for 10 years. You're one of the smartest men I've ever met. But right now, you're letting emotion cloud your judgment. Maybe, David said. Or maybe I've been letting judgment cloud my heart. He hung up before Samuel could respond. That afternoon, David went to see the priest who was supposed to officiate the wedding. Father Bernard was an older man, white-haired and soft-spoken, with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. They sat in the church office, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. Father Bernard poured 2 cups of tea and slid one across the desk. You don't look like a man preparing for the happiest day of his life. David wrapped his hands around the cup. I don't feel like one either. Father Bernard nodded. Tell me what's troubling you. David told him. All of it. When he finished, the priest sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Do you love her? David opened his mouth to say yes. The words stuck in his throat. I thought I did. And now? Now I think I loved the idea of her, the life she represented, the stability, the image. Father Bernard sipped his tea. Marriage is not about image, David. It's about covenant. It's about 2 people choosing each other, fully and completely, even when it costs them something. Especially when it costs them something. David looked down at his hands. I don't think Joy and I are choosing each other. I think we're choosing what we want the world to see. Father Bernard leaned forward. Then you have a decision to make, and you need to make it before you stand at that altar. Because once you speak those vows, they are binding. Not just legally, spiritually. David nodded. What would you do? If you were me? The priest smiled sadly. I can't answer that, but I can tell you this. God doesn't call us to comfort. He calls us to obedience. And obedience often looks like foolishness to the world. David left the church with no more clarity than when he arrived, but he felt something shifting inside him, a quiet resolve building beneath the fear. That night, Joy came to his apartment. She was dressed simply. No makeup, no performance, just her. She sat across from him in the living room, her hands folded in her lap. I'm sorry. David looked at her, surprised. For what? For the things I said. For not listening. For making this about me when it's clearly about something much bigger. David studied her face, looking for the crack in the mask, but he couldn't find one. I've been thinking, Joy continued. And you're right. I didn't take the time to understand what this means to you. She reached across the table and took his hand. Tell me about him. About Elias. I want to know. David hesitated. Then slowly he told her. He told her about the Mondays, the hospital visits, the letter from his mother, the photograph, the 30 years of waiting. Joy listened without interrupting. When he finished, she squeezed his hand. I can't imagine what you're feeling. To discover all of this so close to the wedding. It must be overwhelming. David nodded. It is. Joy's voice was soft, careful. But David, we can still honor that. We can still include him in our lives. After the wedding, we can set him up properly. Make sure he's cared for. You don't have to choose between him and me. David pulled his hand back. That's just it, Joy. I don't think I should have to choose. If you really understood what this means, you wouldn't ask me to. Joy's expression tightened. I'm not asking you to abandon him. I'm asking you not to abandon us. There is no us if I have to hide the parts of me that make you uncomfortable. Joy stood. I came here to make peace, to find a way forward. But you're determined to see me as the villain. David stood as well. I don't think you're a villain, Joy. I think you're someone who cares more about how things look than how things are, and I can't marry that. Joy's eyes filled with tears. So that's it? You're just going to throw away 2 years because of one conversation? David's voice was steady. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally picking up something I should have held on to a long time ago. Joy wiped her eyes, her composure cracking. If you do this, David, if you embarrass me in front of everyone, I will never forgive you. David met her gaze. I know. She left without another word. David stood alone in his apartment, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. He looked at the photograph of his mother one more time. Then he picked up his phone and called the event coordinator. I need you to prepare for a change in plans. The morning of the wedding arrived with cruel brightness. The sky was cloudless, the air warm, the light pouring through the cathedral windows like a blessing. David stood in the preparation room, staring at himself in the mirror. His tuxedo was perfect. His hair was perfect. Everything about him screamed success, control, power. But inside, he felt like a boy sitting on a concrete block, waiting for someone to see him. Samuel entered, adjusting his tie. You ready? David didn't answer. Samuel walked up beside him. You don't have to do this, you know. We can walk out the back. Drive away. I'll handle the fallout. David looked at him. What would you do? If you were me? Samuel smiled sadly. I'd probably do what you're about to do, and then I'd regret it for the rest of my life. Or I'd be grateful for it for the rest of my life. There's no way to know which until it's too late. David laughed quietly. That's not helpful. Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. The truth rarely is. The music started. The guests stood. David's cue. He walked to the altar, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his chest. The cathedral was filled with faces he recognized but didn't know. People who knew his name but not his story. Joy appeared at the entrance, radiant in white, her face glowing behind the veil. She walked down the aisle, every step perfectly timed to the music. When she reached the altar, she took David's hand, and he felt nothing. No spark, no connection, just the cold, polished surface of a life he no longer wanted. Father Bernard began. Dearly beloved, We are gathered here today to witness the union of David Chibwe and Joy Mwanza in holy matrimony. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, intentionally, and in the sight of God. David's mind drifted. He thought of Elias, of the concrete block, of the $100 given every Monday, of the letter folded in his jacket pocket. Kindness is the only thing that lasts. Father Bernard continued, "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." The cathedral fell silent, and then the doors opened. Every head turned. Elias stood in the doorway, leaning on his wooden stick, his clothes worn and faded, his presence filling the entire space. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs rose like a wave. Security moved immediately, two large men in dark suits stepping toward Elias. But before they could reach him, David's voice rang out, clear and commanding, "Let him pass." The security guards froze. Joy's grip on David's hand tightened, her nails digging into his skin. "David, don't. Not here. Not now." David pulled his hand away. He stepped down from the altar and walked toward Elias, every eye in the cathedral following him. The guests whispered. Phones lifted. Cameras flashed. David reached Elias, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "You came," David said softly. Elias smiled. "I told you I would." David turned back to the congregation, his voice steady. "This man's name is Elias Tambwe. 30 years ago, his sister collapsed outside a hospital. She was pregnant, alone, dying, and a stranger stopped. A stranger who gave $100 without asking for anything in return. The cathedral was silent now, every word echoing off the stone walls. That stranger saved a life that day. The woman's name was Esther, and the baby she gave birth to was me." Gasps, whispers, shock spreading through the pews like wildfire. David continued, "Elias has spent the last 30 years honoring that act of kindness. Every week, he takes money and pays emergency hospital deposits for mothers who have nothing. He's been doing it since the day his sister died, and for the past year, he's been doing it with the money I gave him every Monday morning." Joy stood frozen at the altar, her face pale. David walked back toward her, but not to take her hand. He stopped a few feet away. "I came here today to marry you, Joy. I came here believing that this was the life I was supposed to build. But I was wrong." Joy's voice was a desperate whisper. "David, please." David shook his head. "I can't marry you, not because you're a bad person, but because I've been living a lie. I've been pretending that wealth and status and image are what matter, and they're not." He turned to Elias. "This man matters. The truth matters. The kindness that saved my life matters. And I can't stand here and take vows in front of God and everyone when I know that the life I've been building is built on forgetting where I came from." David pulled the letter from his jacket pocket, unfolded it, and read aloud. "Kindness is the only thing that lasts. Money fades. Power crumbles. But kindness echoes forever." His voice broke. "Those are my mother's words, and I'm done ignoring them." He turned back to Joy. "I'm sorry for wasting your time, for not being honest sooner, but I can't do this." Joy's tears fell, smudging her makeup. "You're choosing him over me." David's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm choosing the truth over a performance." Joy stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked down the aisle, her veil trailing behind her, her bridesmaids scrambling to follow. The cathedral erupted. Voices, questions, chaos. But David didn't hear any of it. He walked to Elias, knelt in front of him, and took his hands. "Forgive me for taking so long to see you." Elias's eyes filled with tears. He placed his weathered hands on David's head. "There is nothing to forgive, my son. You were always seen." David wept, openly, unashamedly, and in that moment, surrounded by hundreds of people who thought they knew him, David Chibwe finally became himself. My friends, can we pause here for just a moment? Because what you just witnessed wasn't just about a canceled wedding. This was about something far deeper, something that every single one of us wrestles with every single day. Who are we when the cameras are off? Who are we when the world isn't watching? Who are we when no one is applauding? David Chibwe spent years building an empire. He climbed from nothing to everything. He earned his wealth. He deserved his success. But somewhere along the way, he started measuring his life by what other people could see instead of what God had planted inside him. And then a man sitting on a concrete block reminded him of something he had forgotten, that his life didn't begin with ambition. It began with kindness. A stranger's $100. A decision made in a moment that echoed for 30 years. Listen to me carefully. Your life is not defined by your resume. It's not defined by your bank account or your follower count or the size of your house. Your life is defined by what you do when someone who can give you nothing asks you for something. Elias had nothing to offer David. No business connections, no social capital, no way to advance his career, just the truth. And the truth was the one thing David actually needed. So I want to ask you something today. Who have you been performing for? What version of yourself have you been trying to sell to the world? And what would happen if you stopped? Because here's what I know. The people who love the performance will leave when the performance ends, but the people who love the truth will stay even when the truth is ugly. David lost a fiancée. He lost a wedding. He probably lost some business relationships, but he gained something infinitely more valuable. He gained himself. And that, my friends, is the only trade worth making. Let me tell you something about character versus status. Status is what people see. Character is what God sees. Status is given by the world. Character is built in secret. Status can be taken in a day. Character lasts forever. Elias could have been bitter. His sister died. He was left alone. He spent 30 years in poverty while the boy his sister gave her life for became a billionaire. He could have shown up angry, demanding, entitled. But he didn't. He showed up faithful, week after week, year after year, giving away every dollar, honoring a debt that wasn't his, waiting for the right moment to speak. That's character. And when the moment came, he didn't demand anything. He just told the truth, and the truth set David free. That's the power of living with integrity. You don't have to fight for your place. You don't have to manipulate. You don't have to perform. You just have to be faithful. And faithfulness always, always reveals itself. Now let me pray for you, because I know some of you are standing at your own altar right now. You're facing a choice between what looks good and what is good. And you're terrified. Father, I lift up every person hearing these words right now. I don't know their name, but you do. I don't know their struggle, but you do. Some of them are in relationships that look perfect but feel empty. Give them the courage to choose truth over comfort. Some of them have been performing for so long they've forgotten who they really are. Remind them gently, powerfully, completely. Some of them are waiting, like Elias, for the moment when their faithfulness will be seen. Let this be their season of recognition. And some of them are afraid that if they stop pretending, they'll lose everything. Show them that losing everything built on lies is how you make room for something built on truth. Bless them with clarity, with courage, with the strength to kneel when pride whispers to stand tall. Remind them that their value was never in their title. It was always in their heart. In Jesus' name, amen. Now let's see what happened after David walked away from that altar. The days after the wedding that never was became a storm. The headlines were immediate and merciless. Billionaire abandons bride at altar. David Chibway's shocking wedding day scandal. The photos went viral within hours. David kneeling before Elias. Joy running from the cathedral. The chaos captured from every angle by every phone in the room. David's phone rang endlessly. Business partners, investors, journalists. He ignored them all. Instead, he spent the week with Elias. They sat at the bus terminal every morning. David listened as Elias told him stories about Esther, her favorite songs, the way she laughed, the prayers she whispered over her swollen belly in the weeks before David was born. One afternoon, David drove Elias to the hospital where it had all happened. They stood outside the maternity ward, staring at the doors. She died in there, Elias said quietly. David felt his chest tighten. Was she afraid? Elias shook his head. No. She was at peace. She held you. She named you. She told me to make sure you knew you were loved, and then she closed her eyes. David's voice broke. I wish I could have known her. Elias smiled. You do know her. Every time you choose kindness over cruelty, every time you see someone the world ignores, that's her in you. David wiped his eyes. I want to do something. In her name. Elias looked at him. What do you have in mind? David spent the next month building something new, not an empire. a foundation. He called it Esther's Promise. The mission was simple. No mother in Lusaka would ever be turned away from a hospital because of money. The foundation covered emergency deposits. No paperwork. No applications. No shame. If a woman showed up in labor, she was admitted. The bill was paid. End of story. David partnered with every public hospital in the city. He hired a team. He set up systems. And he put Elias on the board. The launch event was small, intimate, held in the same hospital where Esther had died. David stood at a makeshift podium in front of doctors, nurses, and a few journalists who had been kind enough to cover the story. 30 years ago, David began, "My mother died in this building. Not because the doctors didn't care. Not because the nurses didn't try. But because the system required payment before care. And she had nothing to give." He paused, his voice steady. "A stranger changed that. $100. That's all it took. And because of that $100, I'm standing here today." David looked at Elias, who sat in the front row, his eyes shining. "This foundation exists because of two people, a mother who loved me before I ever drew breath, and an uncle who honored her memory every single week for 30 years. He held up a $100 bill. This is still the amount we honor. Because it's not about the money. It's about remembering that every life is worth saving, no matter what." The room erupted in applause. Within 6 months, Esther's Promise had helped over 300 mothers. Within a year, that number was over 2,000. David's business associates slowly returned. Some apologized for their silence. Others acted as if nothing had happened. David didn't care either way. He had found something more valuable than their approval. Joy left the country. She sent one final message. "I hope you find what you're looking for." David wrote back, "I already did." But not everything was easy. Elias's health began to fail. It started with small things: fatigue, shortness of breath, a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. David took him to the best doctors in the city. They ran tests. The diagnosis came back quiet and final: heart failure, advanced, irreversible. Elias took the news calmly. "I've lived longer than I expected." David's hands shook. "We can get you treatment, surgery, whatever you need." Elias smiled. "I've done what I came to do, David. I found you. I told you the truth. I watched you become the man your mother prayed you'd be. That's enough." David spent the next 3 months at Elias's side. He moved him into a private room in a hospice facility over Elias's protests. "This is too much," Elias said weakly. David shook his head. "It's not nearly enough." They talked for hours, about faith, about regret, about the life Elias had lived in the shadows, giving away every dollar, waiting for a moment that took 3 decades to arrive. One evening, as the sun set outside the window, Elias reached for David's hand. "I need to tell you something." David leaned closer. "The stranger, the one who paid for your mother. I think I know who he was." David's breath caught. "Who?" Elias's voice was faint. "I saw him again, years later, at a funeral. I didn't recognize him at first, but when he spoke, I remembered his voice." "Who was he?" Elias smiled. "Your father." David froze. "That's impossible. My father never talked about her. He never even mentioned her name." Elias squeezed his hand weakly. Maybe that's because the grief was too great. Maybe he paid because he loved her. And maybe he left because he couldn't bear to stay. David's mind reeled. Why wouldn't he tell me? Elias's eyes drifted closed. Some men carry their kindness in silence, just like some men carry their pain. David sat with that revelation long into the night. Elias passed away 3 days later. Peacefully, David was holding his hand. The funeral was held at the cathedral, the same one where the wedding had almost happened. Hundreds of people attended. Mothers holding babies, nurses in scrubs, strangers whose lives had been touched by $100, and a man who never asked for recognition. David stood at the pulpit, his voice steady. Elias Tambwe spent his life making sure that one act of kindness echoed forever. He didn't do it for applause. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because he believed that kindness was the only thing worth leaving behind. David looked out at the sea of faces, and he was right. He held up a folded piece of paper. "This is the letter my mother wrote to me before she died. In it, she said that kindness is the only thing that lasts. Elias proved that, every single week. For 30 years, David's voice broke. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be half the man he was. After the service, David stood alone at Elias's grave. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cemetery. He placed a single $100 bill on the headstone. "Thank you," he whispered, "for waiting, for remembering, for giving me back my mother." The wind carried his words away. 2 years later, David returned to the bus terminal on a Monday morning. It had become a ritual again, not to give, but to remember. He sat on the same concrete block where Elias used to sit. The city moved around him, loud and indifferent. A young woman approached, a baby on her hip. "Excuse me, sir." David looked up. "I don't mean to bother you, but I'm trying to get to the hospital. My baby needs medicine. I'm $100 short." David's heart stopped. He reached into his wallet and pulled out $200. The woman's eyes widened. "This is too much." David smiled. "It's exactly enough. And when you're able, pass it on." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I will. I promise." She walked away, and David sat back down, staring at the place where Elias used to sit. The cycle continues, he thought. The kindness echoes. And in that moment, David understood something profound. His life hadn't started with ambition or wealth or power. It had started with a stranger's $100. And it would end the same way, with kindness given freely, without expectation, without end. 3 years after Elias's death, David met someone new. Her name was Thandiwe. She was the nurse Elias used to give money to at the hospital. They had worked together on the foundation, and slowly, carefully, something grew between them. Their wedding was nothing like the first one. No cathedral, no cameras, no performance, just a small garden, 30 people, Elias's photograph on an empty chair. David's vows were simple. "I promise to see you, even when the world doesn't. I promise to choose truth over image. I promise to remember where I came from, and I promise to give the way we were given to." Thandiwe smiled through her tears. "And I promise to remind you when you forget." They kissed as the sun set, and for the first time in his life, David felt completely free. Years passed. David grew older. His hair turned gray. His empire became less important than the foundation that bore his mother's name. Esther's promise expanded across the country, then across the continent. Thousands of mothers, tens of thousands, all because of $100 and a man who refused to let kindness die. On David's 65th birthday, he returned to the bus terminal one last time. He was older now, slower, but his eyes were clear. He sat on the concrete block, the same one where it all began, and waited. A young man approached. "Are you the Monday man?" David smiled. "I'm just someone who remembers." The young man sat beside him. "My grandmother told me you saved her life once." David shook his head. "Then she's the one who saved mine." They sat together in silence, the city roaring around them, the kindness echoing still. And so the boy born from $100 became the man who made sure no one would ever be turned away again, not because he was rich, but because he remembered. If this story has moved you, I need you to do something. Don't just walk away. Let it change you. Subscribe to Kings and Billionaire Romance Stories by Dennis, because we're not just telling stories here. We're building a family that believes in truth, transformation, and the kind of love that doesn't perform. It persists. Comment below and tell me, have you ever been saved by a stranger's kindness? Have you ever had to choose between image and truth? What would you do if you discovered your entire life was built on someone's silent sacrifice? Hit that like button if you believe kindness is the only currency that matters. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that their worth isn't in their wallet. It's in their willingness to see people the world ignores. This week, I challenge you. Give $100 to someone who needs it. Not for recognition, not for a tax receipt, just because kindness is the only thing that lasts. And watch what happens. Watch how the soil remembers. Until the next story, family, stay kind, stay true, stay unforgettable. This is Dennis, and you, yes, you are loved.